Hi guys, this is Sensho, and today we're going to take a look at a series based on one of my favorite artists, Kaytranada. I'm really looking forward to doing this because I think that he occupies such a unique space in the EDM world. You can really tell that he draws from lots of different genres, and with artists like that, we can learn a lot and we can extract a lot of gems from their production style. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna identify some of the themes from his production, and then we're gonna build a song together from scratch. I'm gonna be using Ableton 11 to do all of this, but I'm also gonna try to talk in general concepts so you can apply any of the things that I'm talking about to whatever DAW you like to work in. So it's gonna be great for either beginner or advanced skill levels. One idea that we're going to continue to come back to is this idea of imperfection. Keeping things a little bit more raw, a little bit more loose, especially when we're talking about the drums and the rhythmic elements in his tracks. That's definitely part of his style. And if you're not used to working that way, it can actually be a really great exercise to just kind of let go and keep things a little bit more humanized. So without further ado, let's jump into the world of Kaytranada. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the drums first here. And when we were listening to some of those songs on Spotify, one of the things that I identified was that the kick is not like your standard dance kick, doesn't have that click, but we're still going to construct it with kick too. And I'm going to show you a good way that you can make a kick like this, or really any type of kick that you want. This is a really powerful plugin. I really like using it, but we're after something a little bit more unconventional, but kick can easily handle that. So let's, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop this section here. And by the way, I want to point out too that the BPM is a little bit slower than you might typically use with, house music. He likes to be somewhere between, like, I'd say 106 and 116, so a little bit on the slower side. So we're starting with 114, and we're going to see how that feels for what we're making today. So I'm just going to start by pressing Command-Shift-M, and that's going to make a new MIDI clip. And what I'm going to do is press B, and that will pull up my pencil, and I'm just going to put a kick on each downbeat, just like so, right? You can hear that's too slow, and what we're going to do, we want it to be on the quarter note, so I'm going to press divide by 2 and see if, nope, we need to divide it by 2 once again. So that's kind of a nice easy way if you need to make some quick kicks. So let's loop this right here. Now, this is a perfect example of the type of kick that we're not looking for. And so what I recommend is, and by the way, if you want to get rid of the piano roll, just press Shift Tab and you can get rid of it and get back to your plugin. So I'm going to leave that looping, and we're going to, as we work, let's actually try to use one of these presets. So if we went to house and we went to, I like this one, it's called Big Town 02. So here's what this one sounds like. Now from what we were listening to on Spotify, we need to shorten that a little bit. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change the length, and we're going to go down to, let's do somewhere right about there. And let's make it a little bit lower. Now, one of the characteristics of the kick is that there is no click, and so you can see from the click section over here on the top right, we don't necessarily want this to be a part of the sound too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, you can see this little low pass, high pass knob, and I'm going to just drag it all the way down to low pass, just to keep the option open. If we want to add a little bit of click later on, we can do so, but I'm just going to keep it all the way down for a second here while we construct the rest of the kick. So now we have the chance to change some aspects of the envelope, right? So let's start with the amplitude envelope. I think that's an easy thing to start with. You just want to get the right amplitude. You want to get the right envelope for the kick that you're working with, and then you can worry about the pitch afterward if you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this this dot right here. This is this point on the graph down a little bit. See how it starts to cut off the kick a little bit? We're just going to bring it down. And then let's grab this point as well, and let's drag it down a little bit here. Maybe we'll keep it up actually. This is a bit, this is experimental a little bit for us. We're just trying to get the right sound here. And then if we shorten this even more, something like this. Yeah. So you can see it's pretty fast already. We can make some other adjustments too to make this cooler, right? So if we added I think at the bottom here there's already some drive happening. So if we bring this down, you can adjust the amount of drive that you want, and even some of these other parameters if you prefer. But actually, I kind of like the way this sounds just to start with. We're just going to keep it real simple and start with something like this. Next up, I'd like to, so instead of a snare, I'm actually going to call this, actually, this is a MIDI track, so I'm going to I'm going to press Command T and open up a new audio track, and I'm going to call this claps, because that is for sure one of the things that we noticed from our listening is that he likes those live claps. Now, I have some claps that I recorded at my place here, and I'm going to use those to work with in the song. It's called live claps right here. So here's what they sound like. We'll take that down a little bit. And we're also going to press Command D, and we'll just copy the kick over so that we can keep the loop going. Now, here is where one of the sends is going to come into play right away, because when I listen to his live claps and some of his songs, there's a real live feel to it, almost like there's some room sound in there. It's not like a perfect studio clap. And so I'm going to add in some of that myself using send C to return C, which, as you remember, is my room reverb. Okay. And so just add a touch in there. Just make it a little bit more lively. Now, if I zoom in, you can see, I'm going to make this track a little bit bigger so you can see. If I zoom in, you can see that these hits are not directly on the grid. That's what we want. Some of them are a little earlier, some of them are a little bit later, just depending on how I clapped my claps, right? But one other thing that I like to do for this style is sometimes the snares and the claps and the rim shots or whatever you're using on the 2 and 4, they come a little bit early on the beat. And so what you can do is have this track delay out and available to adjust. And if you want to do that, you can head down here, and there's a little D in the bottom corner here, and you can actually adjust it and make whatever is on this track later or earlier. So I'm going to adjust this and make it a little bit earlier here. Something like that. And honestly, if you don't have a perfect environment to record these claps in, it's almost a little bit better, because you don't even need to add in more of that room sound. You can just, compress the claps as you record it in your own place, and it will already have that kind of live feel. So it's a nice it's a nice way to make use of a less than ideal environment for a little bit of vibe, So next, let's work on the hat. And there's a there's a Twitter a tweet that I saw a long time ago with Kaytranada talking about how he loves to chop up live drums, and he said he's going to do it until he dies. So I'm going to do the same thing. And there's actually a drum loop called, it's inside of Ableton, and I'm going to have this available for you guys to use on your own. And this is what it's called. It's just it's a break beat. But what I look for when I'm chopping up hats inside of a break beat, especially for this style, is I would pick one that has hats, like closed hat hits, and an open hat hit that you can use without a kick on it, right? So you can hear at the end here, there's a little open hat for us to use. And that's going to be really nice. So the point in doing this, instead of, you might be wondering, like, why not just use a sampler for any of this stuff? Well, the point in doing this is that you can sample different hits of the hat, and it sounds more organic than it would when you're just hitting the same thing. Even if it's a different velocity, like on a sampler, it just has more of an organic feel, almost like there's a real live drummer. And that's the type of feel that we're going for with this type of production. A little bit more real, a little bit more raw. So let's go ahead and pull up the drum loop on one of these pads here. And actually, I'm going to drag this onto C3, C sharp 3, and D3 in case I want to play any of it out on my keyboard here, and it's really simple to do that, right? So what we're going to do is let's change this all to classic mode, and essentially, one shot, if you trigger it, it's going to play through the entire thing. But if you use classic mode, then it will only trigger it based on the envelope that you choose. Right, so this is one shot mode. Now if I go to classic mode here and I do the same thing, and we turn the sustain down, it's going to shorten it, right? And the release down as well. And it will only play the parts that we want. So what I like to do when I have a drum rack like this, you can see this tiny little button here on the top left, and it says show hide macro controls. These are awesome because you can control multiple samplers on this drum rack at the same time. So what I like to do immediately right away is I'll select the first pad, I guess, on this drum rack with our drum loop on it. And I'm going to right click attack, and I'm going to say map to macro 1, and it's going to map to macro 1 here. And we're going to do the same thing with decay, sustain, and release. And really all this is for is to make our lives a little bit easier. You don't necessarily have to do this. And if you're working in a different DAW, don't worry about this part. It's just to make things a little bit easier so that when I move the attack here on the macro, it will move it on all three of these at the same time. And in order to set this up on all three, just go ahead and right click and click map to all siblings for each one of these. And now if I have the attack at, say, 240, and we go to each of these and make sure that they're all on classic mode. They were on one shot, but now they're all on classic. Now you can see that each one of these is at 240. So another control that I like to have control over is the transposition as well. So if you right click and press, I like to separate it out and go to macro 8 and just have this transpose be mapped as well, so that we can change the pitch of all three of these at the same time. And once again, we'll right click and press map to all siblings. So now we can change the pitch of all of them at the exact same time. So just right off the bat, I'd like to have a couple of short hat hits that we can alternate between, and then the open hat at the end that I was talking to you about earlier. So let's call this one hat 1, and I just pressed Command R and I renamed it. Press Command R again, and we press type hat 2, and then the third one is going to be open hat, let's say. Okay, So now what I'm going to do is hat 1 has been mapped to C3 as I spoke about before. Now I'm going to return the attack and decay to really quick, have the sustain all the way up, and we'll take the release all the way down, just so that when we press it, we can control how long the envelope is. So let's find a couple of these hats that we want to add in and make a loop out of. That's a pretty good one. So if I just move that starting flag there and I move the starting flag sort of towards the end, it's kind of nice. You might be tempted to just like really shorten the flags to only include the hat amount, but it's nice to include the rest of that, the rest of the room sound, because it just gives it more of an organic feel. So if you take snap off too, you can adjust the flags to any point that you want. So if we did something like this, and you can also see too that it starts at that tiny little blip right there at the very beginning. Let me zoom in a little bit. So you might also be tempted to put your flag there to start, but the way that the drummer hit it, it doesn't have much of a snap to it. So I like to kind of skip that part a little bit sometimes, and get more of a snap to it. So that'll be our first hat hit. And then now let's go to our second one and find another one. You can usually find it because they're a little bit smaller, like the transients are a little bit smaller than the kick and the snare. So maybe one of these. Yeah, maybe this one too would be good. Right, so we're gonna zoom in again and see it has that same lack of snap. So let's move it up a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And then lastly, let's adjust the flags for the open hat, which we know is at the very end here. And I'm also going to turn snap off, because you can see that at the very end there's this little gray area where I think it's snapping to a 0 crossing perhaps, to make it sound natural. But if you just turn that off, then you can go all the way to the end, which is kind of what we want. Yeah, something like that. So you can hear right away too that as opposed to if we had a hat like this versus just even alternating between these two hits, it automatically it kind of tricks our brain into thinking that it's more real. So that's kind of the feel that we're after. So let's adjust the envelope. I like to start with like 2 milliseconds of attack just to get rid of any click at the very beginning. And then we're gonna make the decay a little bit longer. Let's say like, how about like 600 milliseconds? And then the sustain is gonna be all the way down because we want it to fade out for the length of the decay time. If we have the sustain all the way up, then it will just sit there and hold until the whole sample is played through. But sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of an envelope so you have more control, right? And then we'll take the release, and I like to make it like the same as the decay for drum sounds, because no matter how long you hold the note when you're playing it in by hand on a keyboard, it will always be the same length. So if you hold it or just press it real fast, it's always the same. And actually, one adjustment that I need to make too with the open hat is we actually don't want the sustain to be all the way down at 0. So I'm going to undo that. My apologies, and we're just going to go all the way up to 0, so that for however long we hold this, it will hold out, because we don't want it to sound like a closed hat. So all the other parameters are totally fine, but sustain we actually want to be excluded from the open hat. It's also nice to turn down the open hat a little bit. I like to turn it down to like down 6 decibels ish from where it was, just because they tend to be louder and more noisy, and for some reason they kind of poke out in the mix a little bit. So we're mixing as we go here a little bit. Now the final thing I want to do with this is just raise the pitch a little bit. So something like that. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make, so you can hear this is a stereo recording. So what I'm going to do is pull up a utility, and this is just going to allow me to make the hat hits mono, which I kind of want, because now it will play more nicely in the stereo image. So if we moved the panning around a little bit, or let's say the first hat hit, well, it's not gonna it's not gonna do anything because I'm making it mono. But if we went like this, it makes it a little bit easier to work with when it's mono, and we're doing it from Ableton. Oops, we're doing it from Ableton where we are on the correct track, which is the hat. So it's a little bit more exclusive in whatever part of the stereo image it's in. And now I just want to add a little bit of EQ, and we're going to just, we're going to change the tone of this a little bit. A lot of times when you're working with a live recording, there's a lot of low end there that can easily be cut. Something like this. And then maybe we'll get rid of some of the lower frequencies. Just tighten it up a little bit, because his hats are, you know, they're pretty crispy, so we want to make them a little crispy. Maybe somewhere around like 7K. Yeah, that sounds pretty good, I think. Awesome. So now what I'm going to do is let's make a little pattern so we can actually listen to a pattern instead of me just pressing random keys here. So what I'm going to do is go to my source files here and pull up just a little pattern here. There we go. So you can see too that I played all these in by hand, and so they're all off a little bit. They're different velocities, and there's all kinds of stuff happening with the humanization quality. So that's kind of what you're after. So what I would recommend you do is just go through and record a pass, right? So you go. And just keep it how you played it. So I literally just played that now. Just keep it like this, and maybe adjust any that are super off, but you know, play around with keeping everything relatively imperfect, you know. As we did with the claps, I'm also going to adjust the track delay a little bit, because you'll also notice that sometimes his hi-hats are pushed, like they're delayed a little bit, so they're a little bit late. So what I like to do is just use the track delay and just bump it up a little bit. I usually do increments of like, you know, 10 or 12 milliseconds a piece. So we're gonna make these hi-hats a little bit later. Hear how that kind of has more of a shuffle now? And it's definitely grooving. Cool. Now, you'll also notice too that it doesn't, like, he likes to change up his drum sounds over time. And so what I'm going to do, you can see I just selected all of this, and I'm just going to copy and paste it for another section. So when this chorus repeats, which is what I imagine the first section is that we'll make, when this repeats, we can actually just we can add something a little bit new. So instead of this perk track, I'm just going to press Command T, and actually I'm gonna press Command Shift T and use a MIDI track. And what we're gonna do is I'm going to pull up a shaker that I recorded myself that you guys are gonna be free to use, of course. So this is what it sounds like. And I've also got the MIDI that I want to use for this. And we'll turn this down as well. So it's really nice to have this stuff on deck, even though, you know, it seems like some work at the beginning. It's really nice. So like when this repeats, you automatically have a little variation in there that keeps it interesting for your ears. And so you just do a little bit of prep work and it pays off later in the end. Now, I also, I think that would be a good start for us to lay down some chords. And sometimes I like to just move this shaker off to the side a little bit. Another thing that you can try that he likes to do is use what's called the Haas effect. And it's essentially a delay where you keep it 100% wet. So I just pulled open, I know it says Haas, but this is just the Ableton delay. And what you do is you keep the one side like basically the same as it was originally, and you delay the other side by anywhere, I think between 12 and 20 milliseconds, somewhere in that range. And it creates this like pseudo wide sound, which is something that I noticed that he likes to do. So check it out. I'll turn this off and then we'll turn it on. You can see what it does. So it's kind of larger than life, and especially if you're wearing headphones too, this will really sound like it's coming alive. So it's a pretty nice little trick, and I just have this this preset saved as Haas just in case I want to do this on anything in the future. So I think, yeah, that's a pretty good start. Let's move on to the chords.